All right, guys, today we are continuing our official 2023 redraft fantasy football rankings for the running back position. We covered positions 1 through 11 on my running back ranks last week. So today it's time to wrap it up, finishing out the top 20 with a few honorable mentions. So as always, like the video, comment down below what you think of these final rankings. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and I'll see you on the other side of that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. And boy, if you thought last episode was crazy, get ready for things to be so much wilder in this video. Just because, again, as I iterated last time in the intro, this is one of the more wide open interpretations of running back value I've seen in recent history when it comes to a fantasy football season, just with how devalued the position is as a whole in the NFL and both in fantasy with the more popular versions of PPR and half PPR coming out. You're just seeing a lot of that value kind of move down the board, and with a lot of running back by committees, you don't know if there's going to be true alphas at the running back position. Also, the frequency of injury constitutes towards kind of this vagueness surrounding true running back rankings. So you'll see a lot of different interpretations of consensus rankings, who's high, who's low, top 10s, top 20s, whatever. So that being said, it's sure to get wild as I compare some of my very, very hot takes today compared to consensus rankings based off the Sleeper platform. But before we dive into it, let's run down our initial top 11 from last week. Start out with CMC at their RB1, Austin Eckler as the RB2, Bijan Robinson comes in as my RB3, Nick Chubb at 4, Derrick Henry rounding out the top 5. At number 6, we have Saquon Barkley, as I'm a little trepidatious around the regression of the New York Giants offense as a whole. Then we move into our tier 3 of Najee Harris. I'm expecting a massive bounce back as long as he doesn't injure his foot again. Miles Sanders was probably the hottest take of video number 1, but I think he has true running back 1 potential with his utilization in the Carolina Panthers offense behind that underrated offensive line. Josh Jacobs comes in at number 9 with a lot of uncertainty around his contract situation and his playing status. Number 10 is Tony Pollard for the Dallas Cowboys. And number 11, despite a slow start to the season, I still have Breece Hall ranked there at number 11. So I am recording this before I post that original video, so I don't have all the access to the plethora of angry comments about this player falling out of my top 10. And at number 12, we have Jonathan Taylor, a guy that, for a lot of reasons, I'm out on. He's currently my RB. He's my RB12, but according to Sleeper ADP and most consensus ADP, he is the RB5 with his current draft position at the 110. And this is probably the most out I am on a running back at current ADP. I would not take Jonathan Taylor in the first or second round for a myriad of reasons. Most of which is, let's just look at his production last year. He finished as the RB34, only averaging 11 points per game. A far cry from his RB1 performance the year prior. And I don't think much about his situation has improved in this offseason. Yes, he's going to be healthier as he's dealing with a string of injuries. However, you bring in a rookie quarterback. You bring in a rookie quarterback who is the most athletically gifted quarterback since Cam Newton. He's going to come in and vulture a lot of the opportunity that Jonathan Taylor came from dump offs, from screen passes, and a lot of that goal line rushing ability. Also, we just don't see a lot of passing offense or just a lot of offense in general with rookie quarterbacks. So it's going to stymie Jonathan Taylor's opportunity as a whole. And also, we've talked about, especially in the first video, that production from the running back position is really delineated from the status of that offensive line, and an offensive line that we thought was really good heading into last year proved to be one of the worst in the NFL. And the Colts have done nothing to really bolster or reinforce that offensive line. So there's nothing in my mind that makes me think there's going to be this magical bounce back, and there's still going to be a lot of, fighting through tackles, fighting through defenders in the backfield, and it's just not going to be the clean running ways that Jonathan Taylor had in 2021. Now, if the quarterback situation with his rushing upside and the O-line situation did not concern you, I am even more concerned around the off-field antics that are currently engaging with Jonathan Taylor. Maybe this has been resolved by the time this video is posting, but as of now, we see Jonathan Taylor unhappy with his contract, requested a trade from the Colts, doesn't want to play for them. doing a hold-in currently at Colts camp, was again reportedly to be put on the non-football injury list. And Jonathan Taylor came out and said, hey, listen, check your sources. I was never actually injured, never reported a back injury. There's just a lot of turmoil going on internally within the Colts and Jonathan Taylor. And I think there's, a possibility that he doesn't suit up for the Colts this season. And we're left with Jonathan Taylor either holding in and not playing games, or just a lack of him taking the field due to differences between him and the coaching staff and the regime. So with all those major concerns, he drops down to number 12. And again, I have not picked up Jonathan Taylor in a single one of my drafts, and I kind of recommend you let someone else pick up that landmine. All right. At number 13, we do have our second running back in the top 20 rankings, and it's going to be none other than Jamir Gibbs, the running back for the Detroit Lions. I say running back because as far as Dan Campbell is concerned, he's just an offensive Swiss Army knife. I believe he just was referred to as a versatile weapon. Again, we don't really have a previous history from last season, as he was running back for Alabama out of college. So, a lot of what we're projecting here is going to be a lot of what we're analyzing here is going to be projections of how he can contribute to an offense in 2023. And I think there's a great situation for Jamir Gibbs to really step into. I'm actually a little bit higher on Jamir Gibbs compared to consensus. He's my RB13, as Sleeper has him ranked as the RB15. Currently going at the top of the 4th round with an ADP of 401. Perfectly fine. If we get to the end of the 3rd round and we have Najee Harris gone, if we have DK Metcalf gone, if T. Higgins is gone, Jamir Gibbs is definitely my pick in that area of the draft. So I would be a little bit higher on his current ADP. And unfortunately, the one thing we have to struggle with Jamir Gibbs is unknown. There is unknown about his production. We don't know how he's going to transit to the NFL. We don't have last season to rely on or make projections. He is one of the biggest boom or bust prospect out of these entire top 20 running backs that I'll be talking about today. He could be a top 10 prospect with just an insane utilization in the pass catching games, or, because he is mildly undersized. I mean, I don't think 200 pounds is actual playing weight. He did weigh in at 199 at the combine. I think that was a little inflated. Probably his playing weight's more around 191, which is a little undersized for a running back. So, it could be an injury. Could not get the utilization that you expect him to be because he's undersized, and he could fall out of the top 20. There's just, this is a player that hopefully you have a solid core in the first 2 rounds, and then you take a shot on Jamir Gibbs being your really boom or bust running back in the late 3rd, early 4th round. But I do project him being well. Even despite the size concerns that I just laid out, I do think he's going to have tremendous utilization in this Detroit Lions offense. I've been a big fan. I'm going to rename this channel to the Ben Johnson Fan Club, because I've just been, riding his hype train all offseason, especially after what he was able to conduct with the offense in Detroit under Jared Goff last season. I mean, he was a guy that was favored for head coaching positions that turned down because he wanted to return to Detroit to craft something special and continue the project that he has been building there. And I think with him being one of the top offensive-minded offensive coordinators, considered like this young offensive guru, a mini McVay, a mini Shanahan, I think he'll know how to utilize Jamir Gibbs just fine to get immense production out of him. We saw last season with Ben Johnson as the OC, Detroit Lions were top 5 in both offensive efficiency and offensive points scored. You do see DJ Chark has left the offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown is still there. But they got rid of DeAndre Swift. They brought in David Montgomery, and that's his main competition. Is Amon-Ra St. Brown and David Montgomery. But I do think they're going to have 2 very distinctive roles for David Montgomery and Jamir Gibbs, and both of them will be very, very fantasy relevant. Jameson Williams is going to be suspended for the first 6 games of the season, and as we talked about towards the end of last video, I really like players that are going to get you off to that hot start you 4-1, 5-0. And with Jameson Williams on the sideline and Sam Laporta, historically rookie tight ends, taking a while to adjust to the NFL, I think Jamir Gibbs is going to be, just come hot out of the gates, explode with a ton of fantasy points. He might drop off towards the end of the season, but, getting you put in that position to make the playoffs, vie for a first round bye if your league is built that way, I think is going to be tremendous. And, there's not too many mouths to feed, like as we compare to the Eagles or the 49ers, there's not too many established mouths to feed where Jamir Gibbs can come in and get a high quality and high volume of touches. So I think this might be one of the few running backs besides Miles Sanders that I have valued over ADP. So moving on to our running back 14, another guy that, I think is a deep sleeper and a guy that I've picked up in literally every single draft, well above ADP, is going to be James Conner. Currently, he is the Currently, he's the RB24 according to Sleeper, being taken with an average draft position of 602. That is wildly undervalued for someone of James Conner's status and James Conner's production level throughout the past few years. He's my current RB14, and he finished last season as the RB20, averaging 13.6 fantasy points per game, and that was even with missing a large chunk of the season due to injury. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna project kind of like to like, apples to apples here. And once Kyler Murray went down with injury, if we're looking week 11 onwards for James Conner, he was the RB4 over that stretch from week 11 to week 17. It was absolutely insane, the production that James Conner put up when Kyler Murray was out of the offense. Even with DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown there, James Conner saw just an insane amount of utilization. He was averaging almost 30 opportunities per game. He's a great pass-catching running back, which we know is a cheat code for fantasy, especially when you're playing in these half PPR and PPR leagues. I mean, at this point, I'm happy taking him at the start of the 5th round. That's where I really think his value is. And even with DeAndre Hopkins, especially with DeAndre Hopkins leaving, Marquise Brown is not... with Marquise Brown's stature as a 5'9" wide receiver, I don't think he's going to be, the alpha demanding, 140 targets per game. He'll make Marquise Brown. I like him. We talked about him. He is in my top. He's right around my top 20 wide receivers. The guy I love targeting in the mid rounds, but he's going to do his production probably on like 80 to 90 catches rather than 120, 140. You're going to see a lot of intermediate and short yardage work for James Conner, especially when you have guys like Clayton Tune potentially starting out the season. And listen, there's not going to be a lot of rushing opportunity from the quarterback until Kyler Murray gets back, and we're not projecting that until week 8 and week 9 at the earliest. So a lot of this offense is going to flow through James Conner, and he is in a really, really weak division. So it does project for a lot of opportunity despite him playing on a very, very bad team. We can still find fantasy goodness in these bad teams, and James Conner is a guy that, I'm really targeting because of the air of negativity that the Cardinals organization is casting on a lot of its players, but there's still tons of upside, and we saw a ton of production from James Conner last year, and I don't see any reason why that would change going into 2023. Moving on to our last player in tier 3. I know a lot of you have been waiting for this guy. It's Ramone Stevenson, running back for the New England Patriots. Last year, he finished as the RB11, and Sleeper kind of expects more of the same with that, as they projected him to be the RB11 in their standings. In my standings, he is the RB15. At the beginning of the 3rd round is a little bit too rich for my blood, mostly because we know historically how Bill Belichick likes to utilize running backs. It's never going to be one true workhorse back. Obviously, as we saw last year, was a very special case where Damian Harris got injured early. Then when he came back, they kind of phased him out of the offense. Obviously, given their offseason moves just a few months ago, it's clear that they didn't want to utilize or bring back Damian Harris. So they're obviously prepping, the next running back to come up and work into that running back by committee that Bill Belichick so greatly loves. Also, Bill Belichick is a very unforgiving God. He's a very ruthless dictator over there in the Patriots. And we know Ramone Stevenson, he's a great running back, but he has had his problems with fumbles in the past. And we know as soon as 1 or 2 seems to strike, Bill Belichick has a very low tolerance for that. And we could see games where Ramone Stevenson just has the ball taken out of his hands after a poor fumble, which might not even be his fault. It might be Mac Jones having a difficult handoff. But, the mantra around the Patriots is do your job. And Ramone Stevenson's job is supposed to hold on to the football. If he can't do that, he'll just put another running back. Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong are both guys that they want to take a step up in this offense moving forward. So I could see, them having a greater role after they have a full offseason workout with the Patriots. And it's even come out of training camp that, Bill Belichick has been very vocal about limiting Ramone Stevenson's work. He hasn't been working him into the pass game. He hasn't given him as much touches as we saw from last season. So, we see Bill Belichick trying to cap the workload for Ramone Stevenson. Maybe that's just from a utilization standpoint, from a health standpoint, but I just don't see the upside that we're potentially going to get from a Ramone Stevenson last year. And even with getting the lion's share of the work last year, with a lot of that pass catching work being Bill basically the sole focus of the offense because there's really no wide receiver that stepped up. Jacoby Myers was a non-factor. He still only topped out at the RB11. I really think the RB11 is his ceiling. So if we're going to, taper that expectation back a little bit and adjust for all ranges of outcomes, that's why he falls down to RB15 for me. So that's a tier 3 of my running backs. Obviously, as you can see, there are a lot of running backs that fall into that tier 3 if we talk about the guys from this video and last video, and again, they range from, the 3rd round to the 6th round minus Jonathan Taylor, who's in the 1st round. But outside of the one exception of Jonathan Taylor, there's so much value for high-end running backs that could breach into the top 12, be a borderline RB1 that you can find further on down the board, which is why I think you need to go grab those wide receivers early. So now we move on to our tier 4 of wide receivers, and a guy that, maybe I have to reevaluate this pick due to the recent injury concern. Obviously, he has a groin injury and is going to be out for a few weeks. But, on the flip side, Zach Charbonnet also has an injury, and his report came out that he's going to be out indefinitely until that injury gets resolved. So given that Kenneth Walker has dealt with injuries and has responded very well in the past, I do believe that he should be, based on all reports I see on Twitter and reports out of training camp, I do anticipate Kenneth Walker being ready week 1. I don't really think he needs to be involved in the preseason. It's not really Pete Carroll's mantra. So I'm not too concerned about the current injury, despite the current questionable tag that Sleeper so kindly slapped on Kenneth Walker. But I have a little bit lower. Sleeper has him ranked as the RB14. I have him ranked as the RB16. Current ADP on him is the 311. I think there are better targets at the end of the 3rd round. We've talked about a few of those guys before, whether it's Jamir Gibbs or Miles Sanders. But Kenneth Walker, you still have to share those concerns. At some point, Zach Charbonnet will come back. He will factor into the running game, and we know that kind of that old mantra, anything you can do, I can do better, is basically what Zach Charbonnet is telling Kenneth Walker. He's bigger from not only a height aspect, but a weight aspect. He's also a better pass catcher than Kenneth Walker, and he's used more heavily in the pass catching game at UCLA than compared to what Kenneth Walker did last year or at Michigan State. And just overall, was very highly drafted in the 2nd round. Not as highly as Kenneth Walker, but it was still a very high draft capital investment that the Seahawks went and invested into Zach Charbonnet. Again, I would have a lot more faith, and Kenneth Walker would jump into maybe a high tier 3 if it was still only him. But I do have to factor in that Zach Charbonnet, despite his current injury, will be heavily utilized in this Seahawks offense. That's not to say that both of these guys are going to be null and void for fantasy. I do see both of them, in fact, having quite a good value for fantasy, just because we know Pete Carroll's mantra is establish it. He wants to establish the run. He wants to run the ball down people's throat. He's a very old school ground and pound type of style. And the one thing that Kenneth Walker may be able to hold over Zach Charbonnet's head is that he truly is a better pure runner. I mean, we're talking about Nick Chubb-esque levels of being a pure runner, just pure shiftiness in the ground, making cuts, pure acceleration. Obviously, with his little bit smaller stature, he can get up to speed a little bit quicker. So when we're looking in between the 20s, Kenneth Walker should be getting a good volume of touches. I anticipate, he's not going to get the volume that he got last year when he was seeing 24 to 25 opportunities. We might be a little decreased, maybe 16 to 18 opportunities. But I think with the efficiency Kenneth Walker displays, it was enough for him to, make some sort of fantasy relevant impact, and he's a great RB2. If he falls to maybe the end of the 4th round, I think that's where I would kind of be scooping up in my ADP. The end of the 3rd rounds is just a little bit too rich for my blood, and definitely not as an RB1 that I'm really, hanging my hat on. Moving on to RB17. This will be a fun one to debate. It's going to be Aaron Jones. That's not how you spell Aaron. Aaron Jones. There we are. Our stalwart running back for the Green Bay Packers. And frankly, when it comes to Aaron Jones, I have him valued very similar to the sleeper rankings. They have him at RB16. I have him at RB17. His ADP is in the beginning to middle 4th round at 404. I'm very much aligned with that. If you're going to take a guy, if you need an RB2 in the middle of the 4th round, a lot of your other targets are taken by then. I'm very happy with with Aaron Jones in the middle of the 4th round. This is a guy that has had 4 straight top 10 finishes at the RB position. Last year was probably his lowest, finishing as RB9, averaging only 12.9 points per game. That sounds weird, right? Only 12.9 points per game. And we're talking about a lot of the guys above him who are averaging 11 points, 12.6, that sort of stuff. So, if you look at Aaron Jones, he's just been a guy that, like Austin Eckler, to a much bigger degree with Austin Eckler, but with Aaron Jones, he just continues to get it done. He's very consistent, puts up production, and even with bringing in A.J. Dillon, has still managed to take hold of that lead running back role. I thought they might have cut him going into the offseason or brought in a new running back in the draft. They did not bring in a new running back in the draft, nor did they cut him. They actually reworked his contract, so he continues to stay there as the RB1 over A.J. Dillon. And with Jordan Love taking over the offense with the Green Bay Packers, it's going to be a more, I think, run-centric offense. We know Matt LaFleur as a very offensive-minded, like one of those offensive gurus, an offensive-minded head coach, excellent in working the pass game. And I think he will work some magic with Jordan Love, but with it being Jordan Love's quote-unquote rookie year as a starter, it's his 4th year in the NFL, but this is his first year as a starter. I think they're going to try to simplify the offense for him, and what that's going to do is going to be a lot of screen passes, a lot of running the ball, a lot of making sure that there's established run games in order to use play action passes and really simplifying the offense. And a lot of that with Aaron Jones still being the running back 1 for the Green Bay Packers, he's going to benefit a lot of that. He will still see a large share of opportunities. Also doesn't hurt that they're going against a very, very weak division with horrible defenses in the NFC in general, and especially in the NFC North. So Aaron Jones, honestly, if you really want to go all in and take, 3 wide receivers or 2 wide receivers in a onesie position, and Aaron Jones is going to be your RB1 in the 4th round, I do not hate it. Maybe by that statement in and of itself, I probably should have Jones and Kenneth Walker flip-flopped, but with the injury proclivity for Aaron Jones, that's why I'm, going to keep him below Kenneth Walker for now. Moving on to running back 18, getting a little spicy. David Montgomery, the newest acquired running back for the Detroit Lions. And if again, follow the money. Biggest contract went to Miles Sanders of free agency. Second biggest contract went to David Montgomery. So clearly this is an offense that values what David Montgomery can do in the Detroit Lions offense. They got rid of both Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, so it opened up a lot of touches and opportunity at the running back position. I'm not going to repeat myself. Again, just take everything I said about Jamir Gibbs and my fandom of Ben Johnson and what he could do with this offense and just the creativity he has around play calling, and just apply the same thing I said to Jamir Gibbs to David Montgomery. No need to reiterate that and waste your time nor mine. But again, just an offense that I'm a very big fan of, and I think will provide a ton of opportunity for both point scoring, yards, and then just overall efficiency. But I mean, we look at what David Montgomery's utilization is. He's obviously a much bigger back and much tankier. It has more nose for a true in between the tackles running style than Jamir Gibbs. Obviously over 25 pounds heavier than Jamir Gibbs and about 2 inches taller. He's going to be the guy that's going to be able to shoulder a workload. And we saw for 4 years in Chicago that he was able to shoulder a workhorse workload at the running back position. So we see, if we go back, just harken back just to last year with the same offensive coordinator, with the very similar scheme, with the same quarterback, DeAndre Swift, well, we can just give his role to Jamir Gibbs, and he was very successful, but he was more of a pass-catching threat. He didn't really take too many of the rushes in between the tackles. But guess who got a ton of the goal line work? Guess who was the hard-nosed running back in between the tackles? That was Jamal Williams. And guess what? Jamal Williams finished as, I think, a top 10 running back on the season. It was absolutely insane. Tied Barry Sanders' record for rushing touchdowns in a season. I think that is the upside that David Montgomery have, and having him currently being valued as the RB29 for sleeper going in the 7th round at the 707 ADP is ludicrous. He's a guy that once you get to the 7th round, it's an auto draft for me. I think as a running back, fringe running back 2, especially as a running back 3, he's a guy that I love, especially if you want to punt the running back position and take some guys like, if you're getting a Miles Sanders in the 4th, Jamir Gibbs and Miles Sanders in the 4th, James Conner reaching a little bit in the 5th. And if you want to take David Montgomery in the 7th after going after, a tight end or quarterback in the 6th, I'm loving that roster. He's a guy that, like Miles Sanders, I am not leaving my drafts without. The most common running back room that I'm establishing is going to be a Miles Sanders, James Conner, and David Montgomery, and I think that's a winning formula for fantasy in 2023. Moving on to running back number 19, a guy that probably should be a little bit higher, but I do have concerns around him, and it's going to be Travis Etienne, running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm lower on him at running back 19. Sleeper currently has him listed as the running back 13. Going into drafts, his current ADP is at the 308. But I just don't know if I can really get on board with him having this top borderline running back one season. Even after they traded James Montgomery, even if after he had, I believe it was 76% of touches over the course of last season, he finished the RB17, averaging only 11 points per game. And it's been very vocal by Doug Peterson and the rest of the brass down there in Jacksonville that they're not going to give him that same amount of workload this upcoming season. They drafted Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round specifically to alleviate some of the workload from Travis Etienne. We know he has an injury history, and they know they don't want to put that sort of stress on his body over the course of a season. So even with the optimal workload that he received, the true, astronomical number of almost 80% of the workload, he still was only able to manage an RB17 finish. Maybe he gets a little bit more work in the pass game. Maybe this offense takes that next leap with Trevor Lawrence, emerging as a top end quarterback, but still with the opportunity going to Tank Bigsby, probably on the goal line work with bringing in Calvin Ridley, upgrading the passing offense, making this more of a pass dominant offense. Taking Christian Kirk, paying him $88 million over 4 years. Zay Jones is still there. He broke out towards the end of last season. I just don't see Travis Etienne getting the same opportunity or anywhere close to the same amount of touches that he got in 2022. And with the reduced opportunity, I just have to project that he's going to have a reduced impact for fantasy and probably be closer to a lower end RB2. At the 308, it's a little bit rich for my blood, and there's a lot of other guys I would take ahead of him, like Miles Sanders. Moving on to wrap up our running back room here. The official top 20 ends with Alvin Kamara, running back for the New Orleans Saints. We had some good news and some bad news over the course of the past couple of weeks in regards to his off-field issues. And this is not contract disputes. This is like actual legal issues. All the charges against him from Las Vegas in the Pro Bowl a year and a half ago were dropped. However, earlier today, as of recording, it came out that the NFL is expected to suspend Alvin Kamara. If I had to place any bet on it, it would probably be anywhere from 2 to 4 games, probably on the 2-game side, but it's not going to be anywhere as near as egregious as some of the other analysts had thought prior to this. And maybe if charges had continued to be pressed, if there was actual criminal action taken, we would be seeing a 6+ game suspension for Alvin Kamara. I just don't think that he's going to be, heavily taken away from the field and should have a lot of utilization going forward after his suspension, which again, I project, or I'm guessing, to be 2 games. Yes, I understand last season was pretty inefficient. He really dropped down as far as his yards per carry, but he still managed to finish as the RB18 and averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game. But even as finishing as a top 20 RB, I think he still has that potential in him. But currently, Sleeper has him ranked as the RB28. He's currently going in the 7th rounds, right around the same point as David Montgomery. I like David Montgomery a little bit more over Alvin Kamara, but if we have some savvy fantasy players, take David Montgomery in the 6th round. Well, Alvin Kamara is a great consolation prize in the 7th round. He is 28. He is a little bit elderly for the running back position. But again, he was a guy that split a lot of touches with Mark Ingram when he first came into the NFL. Given that his workload over the past few seasons has been primarily out of the backfield with catches and pass catching work, he hasn't had, some of the career-ending hits or hasn't had a lot of the physical contact that a lot of running backs have to put up with. He's been very lucky from, the injury standpoint, hasn't had too many serious injuries, have been able to stay out in the field quite a bit, which is an ability that we love to see from the running back position. And, you bring in Chris Olave, he's going to step up into a new role. Michael Thomas, maybe he's healthy, maybe he's not healthy, he'll be there, but you still need a guy that's going to be the alpha at the running back position. We've seen Derek Carr be very fruitful for his running backs. Just look at the way he utilized Josh Jacobs last year, helping Josh Jacobs finish with an RB3 performance. I think getting Derek Carr in the offense with the Saints could be just enough to revitalize the offense under Dennis Allen, bring it back to a top 15 offense, really, because it was, I think, bottom 12 in offensive efficiency last year under Andy Dalton. It was just absolutely putrid, and we saw that with the points that even someone as talented as Chris Olave was putting up over the last 5 to 6 games of last season. So I think, with an offseason to work with Dennis Allen, with the upgrade at Derek Carr, the offense as a whole is going to get better. You're going to have Trevor Penning, who's going to be healthy this year, giving a little bit of an upgrade to the offensive line, and hopefully all those things after the suspension makes Alvin Kamara, gets him back to like a borderline RB1. But with that in the 7th round, it's a screaming steal for me. So that finishes my top 20. A couple honorable mentions that we're obviously going to talk about. Alexander Madison, a guy that I don't necessarily hate. I just think his current ADP, in the 4th round is a little bit rich for my blood. Especially we got news of him limping off of practice with a lower leg injury that hasn't been clarified, at least not to me what that is, but I would love to see some clarity around that injury before we go into the season, especially if I'm going to draft him in, the top 5 rounds. But the same concerns I have around Alexander Madison is very similar to what I have around Khalil Herbert. They've just been guys that over the past 2 off seasons, they have been projected to take over the offense as they're, Khalil's going to eat into Montgomery's work. Alexander Madison's going to eat into Dalvin Cook's work, especially at the goal line. And it's just never really materialized. They were never able to, snatch up that target share that the incumbent running back had managed to take hold of. And so now that finally Dalvin Cook is out of the picture, we'll see if Alexander Madison can truly be that workhorse running back, if he can really step up, because he's never had more than 500 rushing yards in a season. And that truly could be to the fact that they just, Dalvin Cook was better and they were going to utilize Dalvin Cook. But if the talent around Madison is what a lot of people had been claiming they had, he should have taken over early. He should have taken more goal line work early. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to step into that role this coming season. J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, guys that I understand they're great mid-round targets. They could be explosive. They could break their way into a borderline RB1 finish, which I'm projecting to be like a top 12 to 15 overall finish on the season. But the injuries around them it's way too much for me to buy into them at their current ADP. J.K. Dobbins still struggling with that multiple compound tears in his knee, ACL, PCL, and I believe his meniscus. And then Cam Akers, not only did he have the Achilles injury that seemed to stymie him for a little bit at the start of last season, but, there's just been a lot of ill intention between him and the coaching staff at Sean McVay. And again, this, I believe, is Cam Akers' last season before he has to sign a contract. Based on everything that we saw play out between the two of them at the trade deadline last year, I don't really think that the Rams are intent on giving him another contract. And with that writing on the wall, they could be looking to utilize different running backs, or they could be looking to wane Cam Akers out of his current role as the RB1 as they look for one of the new running backs they have signed, or even Zach Evans as a rookie to come in and take over his spot. We can talk about the Eagles running backs for a little bit, both Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift. My take on it is that they're both extremely injury prone, and I'm not going to waste my current ADP on guys that, I can almost guarantee are going to miss 4 to 5 games in the season. Also, with the way that the money has been dispersed from the Eagles organization, it's clear it's going to be running back by committee. Even last season, we saw Miles Sanders had a clear lead of that committee, but there's even no really clear designation of who's going to be the lead. It looks like out of training camp so far, there's been a lot of sharing of the touches. There hasn't been one clear dominant guy running with the ones. Rashad Penny took the first snap of training camp with the ones, if that you want to put any stock into that. But guess what? Boston Scott is getting paid more than Rashad Penny. So we like to follow the money here, and that doesn't bode well for Rashad Penny's usage. If I was going to buy one of the Eagles running backs, I'm probably just taking Kenneth Gainwell as a flyer in the 12th or 13th round, a guy that we saw heavily utilized in the Super Bowl last year, a guy that is very beloved within this organization, and a guy that has proven that he can stay healthy, unlike DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. So, I mean, if they fall, great, take the shot. If you already have, your starting players and, you really want a piece of that Eagles offense, I get it. I would totally do it as well. Trust me, it's very enticing to be a part of, but it's hard for me to figure out at this point which one is going to be the guy that's going to be most beneficial for your fantasy team. Yeah, and I'll cut it off there. That was, 5 or 6 honorable mentions, so we don't want to drag this video on too long. But again, that's going to be my top 20 rankings. We'll do only singular videos for the tight ends and the quarterbacks coming up, but those should be fun to break down as we get ever so closer to the start of the NFL season, to your drafts. If you have any questions on guys that I didn't mention, go ahead, drop them down in the comments below. I know I omitted Dameon Pierce. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of comments about that. But yeah, It's going to be fun. Expect a few mock drafts sprinkled in throughout there. I have an idea for a new mock draft coming up that I think will be really fun that kind of aligns with my values around wide receivers, but stay tuned for that one. But until then, guys, take care.